Welcome to episode 23 of the Ulysses Unlocked podcast, where we summarize the Nestor episode of Ulysses by James Joyce. Don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and leave a comment to support us. Hello, and welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are taking a scalpel to one of the most intense and internal segments of Ulysses.
We're talking about Nestor.
Exactly. We're plunging deep into the source material that defines Stephen Dedalus' his very fraught existence as a teacher.
A job he clearly despises.
Completely. He's only doing it out of financial necessity, and it's constantly clashing with his artistic and philosophical soul.
So our mission today is really to cut through that density. You have his philosophical jumps on one hand, and then the blunt realism of his surroundings on the other.
We'll cover his morning classes and then build up to that pivotal and truly antagonistic encounter with the headmaster, Mr. Deasy.
And this deep dive is, I think, essential because this episode just presents this colossal informational and emotional burden that Stephen is carrying.
It's all just weighing on him.
It is. We see him swinging wildly between the abstract heights of classical philosophy. You've got Aristotle, Pyrrhus, the mysteries of time.
And then, bam, the grubby reality of, being in debt in 1904 Ireland.
Yes, and the institutional prejudice that comes with it.
Yeah.
So for you, this analysis is really a shortcut to understanding the intellectual and physical chains that are binding him. It makes his famous statement on history really, really resonate.
Right. We're dealing with history, memory, crushing financial debt, and this huge philosophical argument about fate and futility.
All wrapped up in one morning at a boys' school.
It's a study in contrast, isn't it? The sublime versus the ridiculous, idealism versus bigotry. So let's unpack this. We should start exactly where the sources begin, in the classroom.
Where Stephen is attempting to instill a historical fact into the minds of some very distracted schoolboys.
So Stephen kicks off the lesson by asking his students about Pyrrhus, the king of Epirus, and the city that called on him for help against the Romans.
Tarentum. It's a pretty standard history lesson, leading directly to the most famous outcome of his entire campaign.
That quote is just iconic, isn't it? It's one of those pieces of historical trivia that's transcended time. Another victory like that, and we are done for.
The very definition of a Pyrrhic victory. A success that costs so much it's basically a devastating loss.
But what's crucial here isn't the historical fact itself. It's Stephen's immediate internal reaction to it.
Exactly. He views this whole lesson with this profound intellectual fatigue. He sees the scene as generic, repetitive.
He calls the quote a product of the dull ease of the mind.
Yes. And he sees the whole image, the general leaning on his spear over the carnage, as something totally interchangeable. He thinks any general to any officers.
So history, for Stephen, when it's boiled down to a neat little soundbite, it's lost its terror. It's lost its meaning.
It's just a script, a story told too often.
But that flatness, that lack of real significance, it immediately triggers this massive internal pivot in his mind. It's so jarring.
It really is. The source material just shifts instantly from these dusty facts of, 3rd century BC warfare to this profound existential, almost cosmic despair.
He reflects, I hear the ruin of all space, shattered glass and toppling masonry, and time one livid final flame.
That is a profound shift. He goes from a fixed historical fact to the total annihilation of all time and space in 2 sentences.
And that establishes his central conflict right at the start, doesn't it?
Absolutely. The simple, finite facts he's being paid to teach, the external, structured world of the school, it just cannot contain the weight of cosmic ruin, the despair, and the total futility he's constantly feeling inside his own mind.
It's that constant struggle of the artist's consciousness. The external reality is a cage made of dates and definitions, but his mind is always grappling with totality, with apocalypse, with the ultimate ruin of everything.
He sees the history lesson as a sham, yet at the same time, he's experiencing history as this continuous destructive force.
What's left when everything is shattered? Just that livid final flame of time, burning away the illusion of order. That tension just defines his entire emotional state in this episode.
And then this soaring philosophical moment is immediately sabotaged by the most mundane classroom mistake you can imagine.
Right. Stephen asks a student, Armstrong, what the end of Pyrrhus was.
And Armstrong, who is either deaf or distracted or, just genuinely confused, he mistakes the name.
He hears Pyrrhus as Pier.
And the boys, we're told, they just seize on this with mirthless, high, malicious laughter.
That's a key phrase, isn't it? Mirthless. This isn't just innocent, childish giggling. Stephen notes the malice.
He links it directly to his compromised authority. He's intensely aware of my lack of rule and of the fees their papas pay.
The financial reality completely undercuts his intellectual position. It makes him feel like a paid entertainer, not a respected teacher.
And this specific malicious laughter is such a key detail. It demonstrates the inherent class conflict in the room. Armstrong is one of the sweetened boys, smelling of tea and jam,
Coming from well-off people, proud that their eldest son was in the Navy.
while Stephen, the penniless intellectual, is there to teach the entitled sons of this emerging Irish bourgeoisie.
So then Stephen asks Armstrong to define a pier, and the boy, who's still stuck in the physical reality of Dublin, says, "Kingstown Pier, sir."
And Stephen offers his own famous internal definition, a phrase that is pure Joycean poetry.
Yes, a disappointed bridge.
We really need to deep dive into Disappointed Bridge. It's profound. Kingstown Pier juts out into Dublin Bay, but it leads nowhere but the water.
A bridge is supposed to complete a connection, right? Link two land masses.
Exactly. But a pier is a failed intention. It's a monument to an incomplete journey, an intention that just stopped halfway.
And his question to himself, how does that trouble their gaze? That's the central issue. It troubles them because Stephen injects this metaphysical commentary into simple reality.
By calling it disappointed, he forces them to see the pier not as just a functional structure, but as a symbol of failure.
Ireland's failure, perhaps, to connect, to achieve its promise, to complete its historical narrative.
I think so. For these boys, steeped in the mundane world of tea and jam, Kingstown Pier is just a place their fathers might board a ferry. But for Stephen, it symbolizes thwarted national potential and the general futility of, well, everything.
He sees history, for them, as just a tale like any other too often heard.
And worse, he thinks their land itself is just a pawn shop. History isn't a living chain of meaning or shared culture. It's just a source of monetary value, something to be traded or sold off.
And as the boys fall silent, we get another one of these huge intellectual leaps. Stephen's mind pivots again, this time into pure philosophical speculation about counterfactual history.
He starts asking, what if? What would have happened if Pyrrhus hadn't been killed by a tile thrown by an old woman, or if Julius Caesar hadn't been assassinated by his dear brute Brutus?
This is the ultimate what-if game. It moves beyond the historical facts into the realm of pure possibility. Did those things that didn't happen just disappear?
And Stephen's insight here is the crucial nugget we want you to lock onto. He concludes that the outcomes that didn't happen, the infinite possibilities, they aren't just erased. They're still potent. They're still contained somewhere.
He says they are branded and fettered, lodged in the room of the infinite possibilities they have ousted.
That is an immense concept. It means that the actual world, our reality, is constantly defined and haunted by the ghostly presence of the potential worlds it displaced.
So the fact that Caesar was killed means the alternate timeline where he ruled forever is still locked away in that room. Nothing is truly lost. It's just imprisoned.
This is fundamental to Stephen's artistic mission. If these unrealized possibilities never vanish, then the artist's job isn't just to document what is, but to give form and life to what might have been.
He's searching for an eternal art form that can capture that room of infinite displaced potential.
But then immediately he questions it. The paradox hits him. But can those have been possible, seeing that they never were? Or was that only possible which came to pass?
It's a classic philosophical wrestling match, right? Fate versus free will.
Exactly. If it didn't happen, was it ever truly possible? Or is possibility just the road leading to what actually happens?
It's the ultimate tension between the fixed nature of history and the infinite capacity of the imagination. And then so abruptly, the boys, who are completely oblivious to this, just demand a ghost story.
Their reality is so much simpler, so much more superstitious than Stephen's complex metaphysical world.
And the classroom scene continues its bizarre oscillation between high art and, well, total banality. Talbot, one of the boys, opens a book and starts reciting verses from Milton's Lycidas.
He recites, "Weep no more, woeful shepherds, weep no more for Lycidas, your sorrow is not dead."
It's a famous poem mourning a friend lost at sea, but then it promises his resurrection, his endurance.
And this poetry acts as a powerful intellectual catalyst for Stephen. He takes Talbot's verse, which speaks of an enduring form rising above death, and immediately connects it to Aristotle.
He's synthesizing resurrection with classical philosophy. He thinks of the Aristotelian concept of entelechy, articulating it as a movement, then, an actuality of the possible as possible.
Okay, that phrase, actuality of the possible as possible, is some pretty high-level jargon. Let's unpack that.
Right. Entelechy is basically the process where something realizes its full inherent potential.
Hmm.
So if Stephen sees history as something that kills off possibilities, he's clinging to the idea that Lycidas' soul, or his art, can realize its full potential even after death.
Yes, it's the realization of the essence. It's the highest philosophical truth for him, that thought and soul endure beyond the physical body. And this thought process is so intense, it actually transports him.
He escapes the drab classroom and goes back mentally to the library of St. Genevieve in Paris, where he used to read Sheltered from the Sin of Paris.
He's there again, immersed in intellectual pursuit, connecting this vast, distant intellectual history to the present moment.
And he continues that Aristotelian train of thought, reflecting that thought is the thought of thought. The soul is the form of forms.
This is the peak of Stephen's intellectual refuge, the belief in pure, tranquil, self-reflecting thought as the highest, safest reality. It's the ultimate escape from the physical world of debt and disappointment.
But the classroom reality always interrupts. Talbot repeats another line from the poem referencing Christ, "Through the dear might of him that walked the waves."
Which triggers yet another internal meditation for Stephen, this time on the New Testament and the riddling sentence about the tribute coin.
The command, to Caesar what is Caesar's, to God what is God's. And Stephen sees this not as a simple moral instruction, but as a profound, maybe even cynical paradox.
A riddling sentence to be woven and woven on the church's looms. It's the great riddle of human existence.
Yeah.
How do you reconcile temporal, material loyalty, the necessity of money, Caesar, with spiritual, eternal obligation to God?
This whole section, from Pyrrhus to Milton to Aristotle to the coin, it just shows Stephen's mind working overtime, weaving all of human history, philosophy, and scripture into one continuous, unresolved tapestry.
He's trying desperately to find a pattern or a meaning that justifies the chaos in his own despair.
And all this high philosophical tension needs some kind of release. So since the boys asked for a ghost story earlier, Stephen gives them something even stranger.
A highly bizarre, deliberately nonsensical riddle, right as they're gathering their hockey gear and gabbling gaily.
He poses the riddle, which starts out sounding almost religious. The cock crew, the sky was blue, the bells in heaven were striking 11. 'Tis time for this poor soul to go to heaven.
It sounds like a perfect little rhyme about death and judgment, right?
The boys are suddenly attentive, expecting some clever conventional answer. But after they give up, Stephen provides the ultimate anticlimactic punchline.
The fox burying his grandmother under a holly bush.
Wait, the fox burying his grandmother? The sheer absurdity of that image is just jarring.
It's completely jarring. A fox, a creature of rapine, suddenly engaging in this act of solemn piety toward a relative. It completely undercuts the solemnity of the riddle's setup.
It's not just nonsense, it's aggressively absurd. It marries sacred imagery of heaven with the grotesque reality of predatory nature.
And this is where the nervous energy comes in. The source tells us Stephen follows this punchline with a shout of nervous laughter.
Which is then met by the boys' collective dismay. Why is he laughing so nervously?
That nervous laughter is a momentary breakdown, I think. It's Stephen expressing the futility of seeking neat answers or divine logic in this chaotic, often grotesque world.
He's using antisense to mock the very nature of riddles and prepackaged morality.
Exactly. He's just been wrestling with these deep paradoxes of history and theology, and the only answer he can offer his students is an image of chaotic, predatory devotion. The laughter is the sound of the nightmare, briefly escaping his philosophical control.
It's the chaos of the universe manifesting in a child's game. But then the moment is interrupted by the real world, the call of hockey and the rattle of sticks.
And everyone rushes out, except for one boy.
As the noisy, energetic boys leave, one student is left behind, Cyril Sargent. And Sargent is the complete opposite of those entitled, well-fed kids. He is the embodiment of failure and unreadiness.
He's described physically in a lot of detail. Thick, ungainly hair, a scraggy neck, misty glasses, and weak eyes. He's fragile, and he seems lost.
The text gives us that particularly memorable, slightly grotesque image of him. A soft, date-shaped ink stain on his cheek, described as recent and damp as a snail's bed.
That detail is just brilliant and heartbreaking. The ink stain, damp and persistent, suggests this slow, creeping contamination, mirroring the boy's inability to grasp the lesson.
The snail's bed. It immediately signals Stephen's internal judgment. ugly and futile.
And Sargent presents his copybook, headlined Hume MS, which Mr. Deasy had told him to copy out.
And this moment really exposes the failure of the school system itself. Sargent admits he copied the sums off the board without understanding them, only because Deasy ordered him to.
The mechanical act of replication stands in for actual learning. When Stephen asks if he can do them himself, Sargent just says, "No, sir."
And Stephen sees that the system generates only this ugly and futile output.
But this interaction triggers one of the most crucial emotional shifts in the entire episode. Looking at this fragile, struggling boy, Stephen's internal monologue just pivots dramatically.
It moves from Sargent's physical failure to the profound concept of protective primal love. He realizes, yet someone had loved him, borne him in her arms and in her heart.
This reflection is fiercely intense and deeply personal for Stephen. He observes that without this love, Sargent would have been trampled underfoot, a squashed, boneless snail.
So this protective, sacrificing love saved him from the world's brutality. And it forces Stephen to ask this piercing existential question that relates directly to his own grief.
Was this Amor matris, this fierce, motherly love, the only true thing in life?
The thought immediately connects to Stephen's huge, unresolved grief over his recently deceased mother.
He recalls the tragic memory of her death, symbolized by the trembling skeleton of a twig burnt in the fire, an odor of rosewood and wetted ashes.
And the phrase, "a poor soul gone to heaven," which he used in that nonsensical riddle, it echoes here. It links Sargent's mother, or the idea of motherhood, back to his own recent tragedy.
And then the dark, predatory imagery comes back. He envisions the fox from the riddle, the one with the red reek of verbine in his fur, scraping mercilessly in the earth.
He's linking the pure, protective love of the mother with the raw, destructive power of nature and death.
While he's immersed in these profound thoughts, he mechanically solves the algebra problem for Sargent. The symbols, the squares and cubes move across the page in a grave morris, a slow, formal dance.
And the mundane act prompts a reflection on two great historical thinkers, Averroës, the Islamic philosopher, and Moses Maimonides, the Jewish rabbi and physician.
These two figures, separated by faith but united by their pursuit of vast philosophical systems, are called dark men, who are gone too from the world.
So Stephen connects Sargent's simple, confusing algebra, the sums of a failed student, to a whole history of global, complicated intellectual inquiry.
It's a vision of intellectual endeavor as a darkness shining in brightness which brightness could not comprehend. The ultimate intellectual potential of these historical figures contrasts so sharply with the ugly and futile sums of Sargent.
And this complex internal reflection culminates in that famous Latin phrase appearing on the page, Amor matris, mother love.
And then he analyzes it grammatically, subjective and objective genitive. This is so much more than an English lesson. It's Stephen desperately trying to categorize the very nature of love and death.
Okay, let's break that down for maximum clarity. The subjective genitive means the mother's love, the love she gives.
Right. And the objective genitive means love for the mother, the debt of love and gratitude that is owed to her.
So Stephen is grappling with this impossible philosophical debt. Is he defined by the immense love his mother gave him, or is he crushed by the impossible debt of love he owes her memory?
It's both, isn't it? And the abstract nature of grammar cannot resolve the crushing guilt he feels, especially since his mother's death came after he refused her final religious request.
He knows she fed him with her weak blood and way sour milk. This section is fundamentally about Stephen's failure to repay that life debt.
And he recognizes Sargent's physical form, his sloping shoulders, this gracelessness, and sees this chilling reflection of his own vulnerability. He feels as though his own childhood bends beside me.
He acknowledges a shared secret, a shared history of being saved by maternal love from being trampled by the world. This scene transforms Sargent from just a failed student into a mirror of Stephen's own vulnerability and his profound, unpayable debt.
Once the algebra is solved and the emotional tension is processed, Stephen dismisses Sargent. The moment of profound reflection is over.
He tells him to get his stick and join the hockey game, and Sargent's graceless form hurries toward the scrappy field where sharp voices were in strife.
This return to the chaotic external world is necessary, but it also signals the arrival of the next antagonist.
We immediately see the contrast. Mr. Deasy, the headmaster, is stepping over wisps of grass with gaitered feet. He's the image of fixed, authoritative conservative management.
Utterly divorced from the emotional and philosophical chaos Stephen just navigated. The philosophical interlude is over. The financial and political confrontation is about to begin.
The shift into Mr. Deasy's study is a shift from possibility and grief to just blunt, unyielding material reality. The atmosphere is immediately oppressive.
It is. It reinforces Deasy's fixed, stagnant worldview. The air is stale, smoky air with the smell of drab, abraded leather of its chairs.
The room is a museum of Deasy's rigid conservative values. On the sideboard, you have these fixed inert objects, a tray of Stuart coins, base treasure of a bog,
And a purple plush spoon case with the 12 apostles. These are religious and historical symbols reduced to faded, static relics. They're just antiques.
and the moment Stephen arrives, Deasy gets straight to the point of their relationship. The financial transaction. First, our little financial settlement.
He pays Stephen total £3 and 12 shillings. This payment is the entire reason Stephen is enduring this morning.
And the detail of the payment is so telling. Deasy hands over 2 notes, one of which is made of joined halves.
Which suggests Deasy's obsessive parsimony, maybe even his distrust of paper money. He then adds 2 crowns and 2 shillings.
While Deasy is getting the money, Stephen's hand rests on a collection of shells whelks, cowries, the scallop of St. James.
He internally contrasts the physical reality of the money he just received with these shells, which were once used as currency.
He calls the shells dead treasure, hollow shells, but then realizes the fresh coins in his pocket are equally depressing, maybe worse.
He feels the cash as a lump in my pocket, symbol soiled by greed and misery. Money, whether it's old shells or new wages, represents only struggle, debt, and degradation for Stephen.
It's freedom bought at the cost of his artistic soul.
And Mr. Deasy, ever the didactic authoritarian, immediately launches into a lecture, pointing his finger and urging Stephen to adopt his economic philosophy.
Money is power, he insists, recommending Stephen buy one of his coin machines to force himself to save.
And Stephen's reply is just so resigned and weary. Mine would be often empty. He feels trapped in this dynamic. He sees the money, the lessons, and the headmaster's moralizing as 3 nooses round me here.
Deasy then tries to elevate his financial advice by linking it to cultural superiority, arguing that even great men knew the value of money. He cites Shakespeare. A poet, yes, but an Englishman too.
And then he quotes the famous line advising investment, "Put but money in thy purse."
Now, this is a crucial moment for Stephen to assert his intellectual authority, even if it's subtle.
Right. He doesn't challenge the quote's validity, but he just murmurs the source. Iago.
And by identifying the speaker as the villainous, manipulative schemer in Shakespeare's Othello, Stephen completely undermines Deasy's moralizing.
It suggests that Deasy's wisdom is rooted not in honest enterprise, but in cynical manipulation.
And that slight jab goes right over Deasy's head, I suspect. He's too wrapped up in his own dogma.
Oh, completely. The conversation then shifts to national identity and pride, revealing Deasy's ingrained loyalist sentiment. He asks Stephen what he thinks is the proudest word you will ever hear from an Englishman's mouth.
Stephen suggests the standard boast, right? That on his empire, the sun never sets.
Deasy immediately dismisses this with contempt. That's not English. A French Celt said that.
The true solemn boast, according to Deasy, is purely economic and moral, reflecting his Protestant, self-reliant ethic.
I paid my way. I never bartered a shilling in my life. I owe nothing.
This is the absolute pinnacle of Deasy's self-righteous morality, and it functions as this massive, direct moral accusation against Stephen,
Who immediately catalogs his own crushing debt in this long, painful internal list.
The sources give us a detailed inventory of his financial misery. He notes that Mulligan owes him £9, plus Stephen's socks and ties are also being worn by Mulligan.
Curran owes 10 guineas, McCann 1 guinea, and he lists multiple others, and, crucially, Mrs. McKernan for 5 weeks' board.
This debt catalog is just devastating. The money he just earned, $3.12, is instantly useless because it has to go to the backlog. The lump in his pocket is already spent.
Deasy's ideal of self-reliance is not just difficult for the artist. It's utterly impossible for Stephen, whose life is defined by borrowed objects and borrowed time.
Deasy laughs joyously when Stephen admits he can't feel that pride, but he tries to frame his dogma as generosity tempered by justice. We are generous people, but we must also be just.
And Stephen's skepticism here is vital. He replies, "I fear those big words, which make us so unhappy."
He sees these grand moralizing abstractions, justice, generosity, duty, as the justifications used by the powerful to enforce misery and maintain political stagnation, especially in Ireland.
Deasy then launches into this lengthy defense of his own loyalist political stance, staring at a picture of Albert Edward, Prince of Wales, and defending himself against being called an old fogey and an old Tory.
To prove his complexity, he tries to undermine Stephen's assumed Irish nationalism by citing historical minutiae. He mentions that the Orange Lodges actually agitated for the repeal of the Union 20 years before O'Connell did.
It's an obscure historical fact, meant to show Stephen that political lines are rarely as clear as they seem.
But his loyalist heritage quickly dominates the argument. Deasy proudly claims descent from Sir John Blackwood, who voted for the Union with Great Britain in 1800.
He dramatically stresses Blackwood's commitment, writing, "From the Ards of down to Dublin, they cast his vote, driven by the motto per vias rectus."
By straight paths, which encapsulates Deasy's entire self-image, a man of unbending moral, political, and financial correctness.
He believes his path is the right path, always direct. But Stephen internally conjures an image of Sir John Blackwood as a slightly ridiculous, gruff squire on horseback with shiny top boots.
Contrasting the solemn history with a nonsensical folk rhyme, well, the rel, the ra, the rocky road to Dublin. For Stephen, this loyalist history is just a strange, costumed dance. It's not yet the full nightmare.
So after the political sparring, Mr. Deasy pivots to the real favor he wants. He needs Stephen to use his literary friends to publish a letter in the press.
About the foot and mouth disease affecting Irish cattle.
And this letter is an amazing document because it weaves together legitimate economic concern with paranoid conspiracy.
He uses it to rail against the doctrine of laissez-faire, the idea of minimal government intervention, which he blames for allowing the destruction of Ireland's cattle trade.
He specifically points the finger at the Liverpool Ring, which jockeyed the Galway Harbour scheme, hinting at this vast, organized economic corruption working against Irish interests.
For Deasy, every failure can be traced back to some organized external cabal.
And he insists the disease can be cured using Koch's preparation. And he cites his cousin, who writes that it's regularly treated by cattle doctors in Austria.
So he feels surrounded by intrigues and backstairs influence, preventing this cure from being adopted, which just maintains his sense of victimhood and righteousness.
And in a moment of high irony, Deasy even attempts a classical allusion in the letter, referencing Cassandra.
But he completely misdefines her, stating she was merely a woman who is no better than she should be.
Which just demonstrates how Deasy weaponizes and misunderstands history, reducing complex tragedy to moralistic gossip.
While Deasy is laboriously typing out this letter, Stephen is just sitting there, observing the framed images on the study walls. Portraits of vanished, noble racehorses.
Lord Hastings' repulse, shot over Ceylon. And these images transport Stephen from the stale study into the chaotic, brutal world of the turf.
He recalls the noise, the balls of bookies, the slush, the rush after the winning hoofs. It's a sudden, visceral vision of raw, predatory competition.
He immediately connects the abstract, noble image of the racehorse with the reality of modern struggle. He contrasts the glory of the vanished horses with the hockey game outside, and specifically with Sargent the knock-kneed mother's darling.
He realizes the betting ring connects directly to the slaughterhouse. The joust of life is not a noble sport, but an uproar of violent battles,
leading to the frozen death spew of the slain, and a shout of spear spikes baited with men's bloodied guts. This violent imagery suggests that the modern capitalist struggle for money Deasy promotes is far bloodier and more corrupting than the ancient wars Stephen was just discussing.
As soon as Deasy finishes his letter, the political conspiracy theory shifts into the ultimate climax of his prejudiced worldview.
Mr. Deasy delivers his core belief that explains all of England's problems. Mark my words, Mr. Daedalus, England is in the hands of the Jews.
He details this rigid anti-Semitic belief they're controlling the highest places, her finance, her press. He claims they eat up a nation's vital strength.
He calls them the signs of a nation's decay, and even quotes a chilling line of verse. The harlot's cry from street to street shall weave old England's winding sheet.
And Stephen, maintaining his intellectual composure, he tries to neutralize this prejudice with a universal economic definition.
He strips away the religious and ethnic elements. He asks calmly, forcing Deasy to confront pure logic. A merchant is one who buys cheap and sells dear, Jew or Gentile, is he not?
Deasy rejects this rationalism outright, grounding his bigotry in rigid conservative theology. He states the Jews sinned against the light and are wanderers on the earth to this day.
And what's fascinating here, and so important, is Stephen's internal empathetic response. He recalls seeing Jewish merchants on the steps of the Paris Stock Exchange, and recognizes that they are profoundly aware of the rancors massed about them.
He doesn't endorse their financial practices, but he sees their actions as a desperate, patient defense mechanism born of 2 millennia of historical awareness and inevitable persecution.
They are the ultimate embodiment of historical suffering. And when Deasy asks if Stephen means that everyone has sinned, Stephen just replies, "Who has not?"
And the conversation reaches its philosophical apex when Stephen delivers his most famous line from the episode, maybe his most famous line in all of Ulysses.
In response to Deasy's theological claim about sin.
He states, "History," Stephen said, "is a nightmare from which I am trying to awake."
And that is the definitive statement of Stephen's consciousness. History is not just a tale or a pawn shop. It's an oppressive, inescapable reality defined by repetition, bloodshed, generational trauma, and debt.
He's seeking liberation from the chains of the past, whether they are financial, familial, or national.
And Mr. Deasy, adhering to his rigid Protestant loyalist framework, provides the total ordered counter-argument. He insists that all human history moves towards one great goal, the manifestation of God.
History, for Deasy, is teleological. It has a fixed, divine, preordained purpose.
But Stephen instantly rejects this. He grounds meaning not in the abstract future, but in the immediate chaotic present. He jerks his thumb toward the window, toward the shouts on the hockey field, and declares, "That is God."
Deasy is bewildered, right? He insists on clarification. What?
And Stephen clarifies that God is merely a shout in the street. He's saying that the only divinity or meaning he recognizes is the immediate, ephemeral, noisy experience of humanity. The shouts, the sounds, the clash of sticks, rather than some grand, fixed, distant manifestation.
It's an assertion of immediate secular existence over abstract, imposed destiny.
Undeterred, Mr. Deasy returns to his historical list of grievances, specifically blaming women for the world's ills, using history to validate his misogyny.
He states plainly, "A woman brought sin into the world."
And he rattles off a list of historical betrayals, starting with Helen of Troy. Closer to home, he blames MacMurrough's wife, de Vergilla, for bringing the Normans to Ireland. And most potently for contemporary Ireland, the unnamed woman who brought down Parnell.
It's an ancient misogynistic trope, showing Deasy's desperate need to find simple, morally satisfying causes for vast, complex historical movements. He concludes his political argument with an aggressive, nationalistic battle cry.
Quoting the famous Ulster Loyalist motto, "I will fight for the right till the end, for Ulster will fight and Ulster will be right."
Deasy then offers Stephen some final, almost paradoxical advice. He notes that Stephen won't remain a teacher long, finding him a learner, rather.
And his final wisdom is that to learn one must be humble, but life is the great teacher.
Stephen, eager to be released, agrees to try to publish the letter. And as he leaves, he muses that his friend Mulligan will inevitably find a new, mocking nickname for him for this favor.
He'll dub him the Bullock befriending bard.
But the episode doesn't end there. Stephen is walking out through the gate past the lion's couchant on the pillars, which he scornfully calls toothless terrors.
When Mr. Deasy comes literally running after him.
This detail is vital. Deasy is physically weak, yet his dogmatism drives him to chase down his former employee just to deliver one last fact.
Delivered with stern solemnity, he states that Ireland has the honor of being the only country that never persecuted the Jews.
And here's the shocking punchline, delivered with utter self-satisfaction. Why did Ireland never persecute the Jews?
"Because she never let them in," he cries, followed by a deeply grotesque cough ball of laughter that drags out a rattling chain of phlegm.
That final image, the mixture of self-satisfied bigotry and physical repulsion, is Deasy's last word. It encapsulates his entire character.
Dogmatic, prejudiced, physically weak, but morally absolute in his narrow worldview. It is a final disgusting eruption of the nightmare that Stephen is trying to escape.
But the sun immediately falls on Stephen's shoulders through the leaves, scattering dancing coins of light, a symbolic counterpoint to Deasy's obsession with sterile base treasure. Stephen is leaving with the philosophical and emotional complexity, while Deasy is left stamping the gravel, celebrating his exclusion. What an overwhelmingly dense, high-stakes, and surprisingly dramatic morning for Stephen Dedalus. We have moved from Greek history to cosmic ruin, from Milton to Aristotle, and from crushing financial debt to outright historical bigotry.
Let's quickly synthesize the key takeaways. First, we saw the fundamental inadequacy of history as a fixed lesson, symbolized by Pyrrhus. Stephen desperately tries to impose metaphysical contemplation, but he keeps being dragged back to the present.
Second, the segment with Sargent introduced that profound conflict between Amor matris, which Stephen deems the only true thing, and the universal futility embodied by the snail's bed. This links his personal grief and unpayable debt to his mother with the chaotic, predatory nature of existence.
And finally, the collision with Mr. Deasy forced Stephen to articulate his philosophy against a wall of rigid, prejudiced dogma. We saw Deasy's fixed views on money, history, and nationalism clash directly with Stephen's skepticism, leading to that central quote that defines his journey.
History is a nightmare from which I am trying to awake.
This deep dive illustrates the massive informational and emotional burden Stephen carries. He is attempting to synthesize classical philosophy, personal grief, financial debt, and the harsh political realities of his time, often finding the only release in a nervous, desperate attempt to awake from that historical nightmare.
We covered a lot of ground today, and we should end where Stephen's emotional chaos was briefly released. That riddle. We spent some time exploring Stephen's odd riddle and its nonsensical answer. The fox burying his grandmother under a holly bush.
So think about that final strange thought again. It combines a creature of rapine, the fox, with a figure of ultimate devotion, the grandmother, and the ultimate destination of human hope, a poor soul gone to heaven.
So how does this nonsensical, grotesque miniature serve as a perfect, dark allegory for the emotional and philosophical tension of the entire episode, where love, death, predatory self-interest, and the need for salvation are all inextricably linked, yet salvation is brutally mocked by base instinct?
That's something to mull over and explore on your own until our next deep dive.